Welcome to the Compliance Update by RMCC. This is the Western region, and you'll also notice things that are a bit different these days. So now I'm going to be providing these updates more in a podcast style, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or join the compliance newsletter to be the first to be updated when these drop. And today in the Western region, there is a lot on testing and different regulations around quality control. And so if you have signed up for the paid subscription of the Compliance Digest, then you will find a COA verification best practice in that course. So go ahead and take a look if you are signed up for our Compliance Digest, which is the paid subscription where you get updated best practices, a infographic that you can download, and all the direct links to all of these updates. So let's get started. Our first update comes from Vicente Cedarberg, who released this awesome blog post about the new proposed changes in the state of California. So from Vicente Cedarberg, on March 3rd, the California Department of Cannabis Control, DCC, unveiled its proposed changes to the cannabis regulations in a short public meeting. The text of the proposed rules is expected to be published on the cannabis.ca.gov website today, which was on March 3rd. VS will analyze the full text once the proposed regulations are released, so stay tuned for further updates. I know I will be keeping an eye out for that. So starting on March 3rd, the public will have 45 days to comment on the proposed changes and the emergencies regulations published in September 2021. Dependent on the extent of the feedback, it could result in an additional 45-day comment period or a 15-day period if only minor changes are made to the proposed rules. At that point, the regulations will be reviewed by the Office of Administrative Law, OAL. The OAL will have 30 working days to review. Once approved, the regulations are filed with the Secretary of State and published in the Code of Regulations. Ultimately, we should see these new regulations go into effect sometime in the fall of 2022. However, my certification students are telling me that regulators are starting to implement these regulations now. Some of them are actually receiving notice to comply letters. They're not receiving violations. However, regulators are already trying to teach the licensees on how to implement these new proposed regulations because they are foreseeing that these regulations will go into effect. So highlights of the key proposed changes: cultivation. So cultivation will allow nurseries to designate trade samples. They will also allow the weight of the total harvest batch to be entered into metric when harvested rather than requiring individual plant weights. That is such a huge win. I'm so excited for California that they got this pushed through. Distribution. Distribution will remove the requirement that distributors carry a printed copy of the COA during transport. They will allow cannabis goods held for storage to be distributed directly from the storage premises, and will allow up to 3 sides of the transport vehicle to be used as walls of the secured storage. Also, some really great wins there. And then on the manufacturing side, which removes the requirement for beverages to be in opaque bottles, and will require closed-loop systems to be identified on the premise diagram, which clarifies engineer certification required for the closed-loop system before it's used. There's some additional updates as well pertaining to retail. So retail will increase the value of cannabis that delivery drivers can carry to $10,000 and removes the requirement that goods must be pre-ordered. They will also allow curbside pickup to be permanently available and will permit consumption lounges to sell pre-packaged non-alcoholic food and beverages if local jurisdiction allows. Some other things on the event side will allow cannabis goods to be displayed by all participating licensees, and will remove the requirement for specific retail employees to be identified prior to the event. So there's some other things around the application, cannabis products, labeling, and marketing. So take a look at that blog post by Vicente Cedarberg. All right, and we got another one out of California. So DCC announces CannaConnect, resources for California cannabis industry, which I am very excited about this. So CannaConnect will serve as a one-stop shop for cannabis businesses to find the information, resources, and support they need at each stage of the regulatory process, from initial licensure to remaining in compliance. Canna Connect offers simple information materials on the processes mandated by the state for cannabis businesses, from applying a unique ID and using California track and trace system to preparing for on-site inspections, understanding regulatory compliance requirements, and so much more. This is so exciting. I can't believe other states have not done this sooner. It's definitely a huge win for California compliance and California licensees. And some important updates coming for California in licensing. So this is the last update out of California for this month. On March 31st, 2022, the deadline for submission of applications to be considered for provisional licenses. This does not apply to license applications for mixed light and indoor cultivation at or less than 22,000 square feet for contiguous premises and outdoor cultivation at or less than 20,000 square feet of contiguous premises. On June 30th, 2022, the deadline for cultivators to submit an application and be considered for a provisional license, that is what that deadline is. Cultivation sites must be less than or equal to 20,000 square feet of outdoor canopy or less than or equal to 22,000 square feet of indoor or mixed light. This does not apply to local equity applicants. Another deadline is September 30th, 2022, which is the last day for DCC to issue provisional licenses for cultivation sites less than or equal to 20,000 square feet of outdoor canopy or less than or equal to 22,000 square feet of indoor or mixed light. This does not apply to local equity applicants either. And then on March 31st, 2023, so a year from now, this deadline for local equity applicants to submit a license application and be considered for a provisional license. And then June 30th, 2023 is the last day for DCC to issue provisional licenses to local equity applicants. So we are officially moving away from the provisional licenses and moving forward with annual applications. Out of Colorado, we have two different updates. One pertaining to employees and the employee list within Metric. And then the other one is pertaining to manicure and harvest batches and the Metric functionality there. High level, they are now allowing you to combine multiple manicure harvest batches into one harvest batch to help with testing, which is really exciting. So please feel free to dive into these bulletins on your own, but high level, let's just go on over the updates. So the MED issues compliance tips regarding the manicure batches and Metric employee lists. So from the bulletin, the Metric employee list, this list within Metric must include all employees who physically work on the business's licensed premises. So for an example, any employee who reports to the facility in person. Additionally, the employee list must be used to meet more general employee list requirements in the MED Rule 3-905. Additional Metric employee list requirements. So MED Rule 3-805B requires that at least one owner licensee fills the role of Metric administrator because owners have a vested interest in the effective and compliant management of the business. If an employee, rather than an owner, is designated as the industry admin, that employee has the ability to change which facilities are listed under the business, block other employees from Metric access, and make a variety of significant high authority technical changes in the Metric account. The status of admin in the employee list can be granted by the industry admin or other employees with administrator status, but cannot be granted by Metric support or by other employees without administrator status. And this is pretty standard. I have seen in some other states that they don't exactly require the Metric administrator to be the owner and they can designate other people to be that person. However, this is a pretty standard rule in Colorado, and it's honestly kind of shocking that some other states don't require this specifically to be an owner. Also, the MED is issuing this compliance tip to highlight specific regulations, other information, and provide guidance to licensees regarding manicure batches and the allowance to combine manicure batches with harvest batches when creating test batches. So super exciting. That's what this bulletin is looking at right here. So go take a look at that on your own. All right, and now we are going to switch on over to Oregon. So Oregon, the OLCC released a compliance education bulletin about retesting, remediation, and destruction of failed packages. So from the technical advisory bulletin, The retesting and remediation, if a batch passes all state mandated testing, it can be transferred to its intended destination. If, however, the batch fails any of the state required tests, the originating licensee has two options dependent on the test type that resulted in the failure. First, regarding of the test type, the licensee may request a reanalysis and retest be conducted. Second, for all the tests other than pesticides, the licensee may remediate the product. Remediation may occur after the first failure of the batch or if the retested process results in a second failure. They also go on to note the destruction of failed packages. Should be down here. If packages need to be destroyed after failing for pesticides or solvents, they must be held by the licensee until they are destroyed in a manner approved by the Commission. To receive permission to destroy the packages, the pesticide or solvent failure notification form needs to be completed and submitted to marijuana@oregon.gov. And we got another one out of Oregon. So this one is focusing in the retail and the home delivery in Oregon. So from the technical email, the OLCC has created a new home delivery section on its website, the Marijuana Home Delivery in Oregon section. Cities and counties can now opt in to allow licensed cannabis retailers to make marijuana home deliveries from adjacent jurisdictions. Prior to the modification, cannabis retailers were only allowed to make deliveries to home residents within the city or county where the retailer was physically located. The home delivery change is a result of legislation approved by the 2021 Oregon legislature. In the Know Your Boundaries section, there are two resources segments for taking action. One for cities and counties that want to consider allowing adjacent jurisdiction delivery, and the other for OLCC licenses that want to offer this type of delivery. The OLCC has created an interactive OLCC home delivery map that can be used to figure out if an OLCC licensed cannabis retailer is allowed to make a home delivery to an adjacent city or county. A local government must first approve a local ordinance allowing adjacent jurisdiction delivery before a retailer in an adjacent city or county can make those deliveries. Here's an example of how this would work from the OLCC. A retailer in City A wants to make home deliveries within City B. City B must first pass a city ordinance allowing deliveries from City A and notify the OLCC of that change. After that notification, a retailer in City A can begin offering and making deliveries in City B. The Know Your Boundaries FAQ section includes additional information about the expanded marijuana home delivery program. So we can take a look at everything here. Here's some frequently asked questions, and then here's some of those licensees, resources, and that city and county resources that they mentioned. All right, Oregon again. And this is the last update out of Oregon. So LLCC announces coming soon, new cannabis testing rules. Ruh-roh. Per the OLCC email, the Oregon Health Authority, which rules for testing cannabis that affects both the medical and recreational market, newly adopted testing rules will go into effect March 31st, 2022, that makes many changes to testing. This bulletin is a summary of the major changes and should not be relied on solely. You may review the testing rules found in Division 7 and 64 in full at healthieroregon.org/OMMP rules. In addition, guidance documents are available to help understand sampling changes, metric changes related to testing, what to do with failed items, and an outline of the new tests along with the timeline. All guides can be found at, again, healthioregon.org/marijuana testing. Cool. So here's one of those websites. Here's the other one. And here's a high level bulletin. It's 6 pages in length. So for sure, dive into that if that is going to impact you. All right, and the last 5 updates are out of Washington. Okay, so this email is titled Board to Host Online Roundtable to Discuss Safety at Cannabis Retail Stores. So from the email, in the wake of a deadly spat of armed robberies at 3 cannabis retail stores, which resulted in 3 deaths within 4 days, the LCB will will next week host an online roundtable to discuss safety at cannabis retailers. The LCB will meet with cannabis retailers, elected officials, National Safe Banking Act advocates, and others to discuss the urgent safety crisis. It's pretty scary. And out of Washington, we're talking testing again. So the LCB board action, cannabis quality control testing. Alrighty, so from the email on March 2nd, during a regular scheduled meeting, the LCB took the following action. So cannabis-related action, which is a permanent rulemaking, approved a rulemaking order CR 103 regarding cannabis quality control testing. These rules require all cannabis products produced, processed, and sold in Washington state to be tested for pesticides and allow the LCB to conduct randomized or investigative-driven testing of cannabis products for heavy metals. Although these rules go into effect on April 2nd, 2022, the LCB will allow a transitional time period for a current product sell-down period. During this time, post-harvest marijuana products that do not comply with these updated testing requirements may be sold, distributed, or both within a reasonable period of time to be determined by the board. The board will announce details of the transitional time period by April 2nd, 2022. And let's unpack these pesticide rules a little further. So, from the email, the LCB today adopted final rules to require pesticide testing on all cannabis products. In addition, these updated rules also allow the LCB to test marijuana products for heavy metals on a random basis or as part of the investigation. Again, the rules will go into effect April 2nd, 2022. Additional time will be allowed for products allowed in the system to sell through. So, take a look at this email. It's titled Board Adopts Pesticide Testing Rules. It unpacks it a little bit further, but we do need to take a look at those regulations for a deep dive into those updates by April. Alrighty, and our last update in the Western region, again out of Washington. So, session on conceptual draft rules about the social equity and cannabis program is on March 23rd. The LCB is hosting a listen and learn session about conceptual draft rules on the social equity and cannabis program. The session is designed to get public and licensee feedback on rule concepts before the agency moves forward a rule proposal. In late October 2021, while awaiting recommendations for the Social Equity and Cannabis Task Force, the LCB began to consider amendments to existing rule and new rules that would both support and establish the social equity and cannabis program. The CR 101, or Statement of Inquiry, was filed as WSR 21-22-042 on October 27, 2021. The task force released recommendations on January 6, 2022, and the agency began to draft rules based on these recommendations. The conceptual draft rules will be viewed here. Please review this guidance document and the session agenda before the forum and come prepared to offer feedback and suggestions for revisions to the draft. And here we are taking a look at all of those different things. Again, 3 pages of documents for this update. And that is your update for the Western region for March 2022.